Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. And today, as we wrap up the 2024-2025 season with the Super Bowl on Sunday, we thought it would be fitting to do a final preview show as the season concludes.
Yeah, the final countdown, whatever you want to call it. We don't really have any NFL news, so we're going to get right into the nitty-gritty, breaking down the final game of the season. I think you've structured how you want to talk about it quite well in terms of like matchup stuff. So let's get right into it. The Chiefs offense versus the Eagles defense. Who has the edge there? And as someone who, jumping a little bit ahead to predictions, I think the Eagles might overcome the Chiefs in this game. I think they have a pretty strong advantage, especially when it comes to their defensive line talent.
That is definitely a point of emphasis that will be made throughout this episode and this section in particular. But where I want to start is where this team kind of left off after losing to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And if you remember, that was an Eagles defensive unit that led the league in sacks, that had a very similar philosophy to Vic Fangio, because Sean Desai, a Vic Fangio disciple, I believe, in Chicago, and might have even followed him a little bit to Denver. He was the defensive coordinator last year. And Vic Fangio would have been the defensive coordinator for the Eagles to replace Jonathan Gannon if there weren't some rumors of like collusion and rule breaking when Vic Fangio was helping the Eagles game plan for the Chiefs back in 2022. So a lot of ties, a lot of history there. Obviously, the game plan doesn't come to fruition, but where you talk about some of those mismatches potentially on the offensive line, for me, I think honestly the depth that the Eagles defensive line had 2 years ago was a little bit more impressive than the depth they have now. Now, obviously, the star power in Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, you start going down some of the list of just like their depth guys and Milton Williams and Jordan Davis and potentially getting Brandon Graham back. Like those are some huge key pieces that are going to create some mismatch issues. But for me, I think it's Vic Fangio's philosophy going back to the guy that's calling plays. And for me, I think he's okay with an offense going 12, 14 play drives to try to go score. I mean, that's exactly what he did against the Washington Commanders last week or 2 weeks ago now, and then did against the Rams prior to that. And it's you have to earn every single yard. But that's how the Chiefs are designed. That's how they've been designed during this almost historical three-peat. And I'm just curious if Vic Fangio almost has to change things up in order to gain an edge, or like you said, their talent is just going to impose their will.
I'm not so sure that they do have to change it up. And like you're talking about, this is what they've been doing all year. They did this to the Carolina Panthers. And I'm not saying that we have the offensive firepower that the Washington Commanders had, that the Rams have, that even the Chiefs have. But that's what we had to do in that game. We almost pulled it off. I think it was a 12 or 13 play drive there at the end. But we all know how that game ended with a dropped touchdown, or I don't think he was touched. Maybe he doesn't roll in, even if he catches it. That's neither here nor there. But I bring up that Panthers game because today in the Super Bowl media sphere, you know, like a lot of players, a lot of content creators are down in New Orleans. That's where the side of the Super Bowl is, talking to players, picking their brains about each team. And one of the people they talked to today who played against both teams this year was Bryce Young. And they asked him, can you kind of talk about, this was a Bleacher Report. They asked him, can you kind of talk about the differences between the Chiefs and Eagles defenses because you played against both of them? And he started off with the Eagles defense by saying, they're really fundamental. They do what Vic Fangio wants them to do, and it's because they have such a stout defensive line that they don't have to blitz. They can get after you with 4 people. The Panthers had a pretty strong, I think, pass-blocking O-line this year. You could hover them right around 10th, somewhere around there, and they got demolished the entire game. Bryce was running for his life. He took a sack on the first drive, I think, on a rare Zach Bond blitz, one of the few times that they did blitz, instant sack, and he was getting harassed, led to his first interception in 4 games. I think that was the stretch there. It was the Saints to the Eagles game. And then at the end of the game, the miraculous play he makes bouncing out of the end zone, he's getting sacked by like 2 different people. He's just able to be slippery and get away from them. That's all from a basic front with like the people you talked about: Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. I'm not sure if Bryce Huff is the signee that they had hoped for, but then you bring in a guy like Brandon Graham, like you're talking about, Zach Bond, and the other Oren Burks, the other linebacker, is also able to blitz. They have the talent there, the high end talent, and one of the key sticking points for me in terms of Chiefs' weaknesses has been that left side of the line, whether it's Joe Thuney lining up at left tackle, whether it's him staying at guard, and who's the DJ Humphreys, who they picked up, or Wanya Morris, who hasn't excited, the rookie they drafted out of BYU. Suama Taia has not been good whatsoever. And then the guy that they bring in when Thuney goes out to left tackle, Caliendo, he was getting harassed by Ed Oliver like all day in that Bills game. And I think from a talent perspective, the Eagles defensive line is at least 1 or 2 steps up from the starters on the Bills offensive line. And if they're able to impact Patrick Mahomes in that way, it gets him out of the 12-14 play drive. It gets him away from having the highest success rate for any offense. They have to get chunk plays is what they'll have to do if that defensive line gets home. And I really, really think they have the chance to do that. And then that's not even mentioning the guys they have at the second and third levels that can cover.
Well, to your point about those second level players, some of them are phenomenal. And again, a testament to how Howie Roseman has really reshaped this defense over the past 2 years. This is not the same unit that faced Patrick Mahomes 2 years ago in Arizona. And part of that is the drafting Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, some of these star players on the back end, bringing in Zach Bond, Devin White. They had drafted Nakobe Dean in the past couple years. Oren Burks is a guy that they picked up, I believe, from the San Francisco 49ers. So you have a lot of depth on that back end through free agency, through the draft, and a lot of those players have stepped up. My thing is when Isaiah Rodgers has been on the field, offensive play callers have been really keen on targeting him. So Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, some of these guys get banged up for whatever reason at any point in the game, and we see snaps of this guy on the field. That is a mismatch that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes will target. And Oren Burks, even though he had a great game in the NFC Championship game, like that's the guy I think Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are going to target in this game. Whether it's Noah Gray is the guy he's covering. And that has been a number 2 option from a tight end standpoint that Mahomes has been able to use at different points in the season. So finding those mismatches is something that they've done against the Houston Texans, the Buffalo Bills this playoff series. And they're going to continue executing that because they're going to try to poke and prod at these weaknesses. And the Chiefs are known to get in 12 personnel. So if they get in 12 personnel, are they going to be able to just lean into the run game, kind of bully their way up front and just methodically move the ball downfield? Or will the Eagles defense get bigger to kind of combat that? And if they get bigger, are the Chiefs then dropping back and passing? And then again, you have those mismatches that we just talked about, whether it is Travis Kelce, whether it is Noah Gray, that are able to kind of bully some of these smaller defensive backs or run past these heavier, slower linebackers.
It's always the chicken and egg game, right? Like, how are we as an offense going to attack this defense? And then how's the defense going to have personnel to match up with the offense? And I want to look back at the 2 teams that the Chiefs have faced prior in the playoffs. Obviously, the Texans have a really stout defense, like at every level. And the Chiefs not necessarily moving the ball at will in that game. They struggled at times, but their defense dominated the day and made the Houston's offense struggle more. And that's really the takeaway of that day. Then they played the Bills, and the Bills secondary was nothing short of atrocious, right? They lose it's not Taron Johnson, it's the other starter that they lost early. Kyer Elam had to come in, and Mahomes was able to have his way there. I think the Eagles secondary presents more of a challenge closer to the Texans group than it does the Bills group. If you can look at the Bills, their main weakness is their secondary, right? Like, I think the rest of their team is quite good, maybe receiver as well. But
as soon as Benford went out, it can completely change their game plan. And it's just I hate to see that, but it is a weak league system.
And that's the point I want to make is while Isaiah Rodgers might be the Kyer Elam of the Eagle secondary, the rest of their secondary, I think, matches up quite well. Quinyon Mitchell, phenomenal rookie year. Cooper DeJean, unless it's a 35-plus-year-old white guy, I think he's Travis Kelce. You never know. And then Darius Slay, I think, is still a functional corner. You got to think 2 years ago they had James Bradbury covering who knows who it was, and he got the holding penalty there. I think each of the corners this year are a step up from 2022 James Bradbury. And then if you remember, it was they had immediately paid him after that game, and so many Eagles fans were distraught. Bradbury, that is, they extended him. It's like, why are we extending this guy? He's old. He's causing us to lose the game with the holding penalty. I think the guys that they brought in have upgraded that cornerback room thoroughly. Whether it's like Mitchell being the number 2 and Slay still being the number 1, DeJean being the slot guy, and then they replaced Chauncey Gardner-Johnson with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So I really think that across the board, this is probably going to be the hardest defense that the Chiefs have faced, at least in the playoffs, if not all season.
I would be very hesitant to say that, because I think if the Texans had the Eagles offense on the other side of the ball, they could be more opportunistic. I think we would have seen them play at an even slightly higher level. For me, you brought up the point about the Eagles secondary probably getting better than it was 2 years ago, which you're probably right. But can you name me the top 3 wide receivers from that Chiefs team? Obviously, Travis Kelce was playing out of his mind at that point and has kind of rekindled some of that kind of play in the playoffs the past couple years. But he wasn't throwing the studs. And they brought on Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins. Xavier Worthy has been an exciting rookie that has really caught fire. I mean, when you look at kind of what he's done over the last 7 games, really the back half of the season, he's had 5+ receptions in every single game. We've seen his impact. Where you talk about these guys that are able to cover, have they covered a guy like Xavier Worthy this year? Have they been able to lock down a guy like Hollywood Brown, who has the ability to blow past you? And while Patrick Mahomes and Hollywood Brown haven't been able to connect on some of these deep shots, they've been there. They've attempted them. And all it takes is 1 or 2 of those deep shots to hit, and that kind of blows the game right open. So that is the other thing I would bring up is, yes, while the Eagles secondary has improved, I think the Chiefs pass catchers this time around are also a little bit better, and that's going to allow them to do different things and force the Eagles into either different coverages or alignments based on what they're seeing.
Well, first of all, let's respect 2-time Super Bowl champion Kadarius Toney, who really saved the Chiefs in that Eagles Super Bowl. If he weren't traded there, we're not talking about Mahomes having the chance to three-peat here. But I'm looking at the Eagles' opponents this past season, some of the players that they've played receiving-wise. Matched up against Malik Neighbors twice, CeeDee Lamb. I'm not going to get into the Panthers receivers there. They had Zay Flowers as well, Puka Nacua twice, twice. He played in the first
Scary
matchup.
Terry 3 times.
Scary Terry,
I get it.
And I'm trying to find like a speed comp kind of person, and I keep coming back to a Christian Watson, who's physical and fast, and they did a good job. I'm first game of the season.
Week 1. That's what I was he wasn't on the field for that wild card game.
First game of the season. Obviously week 1, that's like a game that's up in the air every year. But they faced a litany of receivers, and while out on the surface, I think Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, and Worthy are definitely better than Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Mecole Hardman, and Scott. So he's still on the team.
He is, but he's coming back from
he's still on the team.
Him and Rashee Rice are dealing with injuries, but yeah.
Sky Moore is on the team, right? Like that's kind of how we're thinking it. But I think at an improvement level for both of those squads, I think they've both taken great leaps. But the key for me here is when you're looking at those receiving cores, Travis Kelce. Kelce 2 years ago was much different than the guy he is right now. Even from last year, like last year was the whole every time Taylor Swift's there, he turns into a monster, right? Well, even when Taylor Swift was there this year, the signs of rust are really showing. And like you're saying, while he's kind of rekindled that relationship, it was really more he had 2 or 3 yak catches over the past couple of games. He's not the destructive, explosive player that he was. But to your point, Noah Gray is a viable second option. Look at the Panthers game with Noah Gray. But I do think in terms of what units have improved the most to where it's going to impact the overall output of the game, I think the secondary unit improving to the step that it did outweighs a little bit the receiving group's net improvement, because Travis Kelce taking a step back, I think, is a big thing for them over the past 2 years, obviously.
Yeah, no, I mean, not having prime Travis Kelce is going to be huge. I think the biggest thing for me when watching him, and I think we've even discussed this on air, is that he's like Jason Witten at this point,
Yeah.
where he's that slow body that somehow always gets open. He's always going to catch it. For me, it is some of those yak opportunities he's created in the playoffs. But that touchdown he had against the Texans, I mean, that was cold. And like for
Yeah.
me, that's where it's like if you're trying to expose some of these matchups, whether it's him or Noah Gray on Oren Burks, like I think you have to expose that. Now, I don't think the Eagles are going to allow Travis Kelce on Oren Burks. I think whether it's Zach Bond potentially in coverage with him or some of their like nickelback safeties kind of covering him or shadowing is going to be key for them to kind of shut down the middle of the field. And obviously, we saw the Texans take away the perimeter players. So I definitely think with the outside talent that the Eagles have, they can do that. But again, we haven't seen a lot of man press from this team. We've seen a lot of kind of off coverage looks. And again, give you everything you want. Take what you want in the flats. We're going to rally and we're going to tackle. And I think that's the one thing that's comparable, regardless of schematic differences of both the Chiefs and the Eagles. And that's part of the reason why they've gotten here is that they're very good tackling teams. These are guys that know how to rally and really get after the ball. I mean, we saw it last 2 weeks ago. I keep saying last week, but the Eagles, when they were putting kind of the foot on the gas against the Commanders, were able to rally, tackle, punch out the ball, and force a lot of turnovers that way. And so it will be very interesting to see, are they able to kind of create some of those negative plays that really turn a game? Because this Chiefs offense is going to be very methodical. They love doing these 12, 14 play drives where they're scoring touchdowns. And if you aren't able to force a turnover, a mistake, it just takes one on either side to completely flip the game. Like you said, the Kadarius Toney punt return was a huge part in their comeback against the Eagles in that Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts having that one fumble 6 was massive swing in the first half that kept the Chiefs in the game. So it's those kind of miscues that are going to really determine who wins. And so I think this is a good kind of transition from this Chiefs offense that is really good at just kind of chugging out yards. And we didn't talk about Kareem Hunt, but I think he's kind of on that arc where he's that 3-yard Ezekiel Elliott. You need 3 yards, he's going to get it. You need 5 yards, he's going to get you 3 yards. Like that's the stage of Kareem Hunt's career. And it's obviously worked, but that's where he's at.
And I want to talk about that before we move on to the Eagles run game, which is, I think, where you were going. 2 years ago, despite the Eagles leading the league in sacks, they were one of, if not the worst, against the run. Their front bled against it quite consistently. They fixed that over the past 2 years. Milton Williams is nasty in the run game. When I say fixed, they're not
serviceable. Yeah, they aren't the worst. Yeah.
Like while the Eagles D line 2 years ago, like you're saying, led the league in sacks, like everybody was going crazy. Hassan Reddick was going crazy at the time. They bled in the run game, and that's why teams are able to compete with them. Now, that's not as nearly as big a weakness as it has been. Zach Bond is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. We'll find out on Saturday if he is. Who knows? But he's a candidate because he rallies to the ball and tackles the ball carrier at a high level. Jordan Davis takes up all that space as a run blocker. Milton Williams is another big guy that can get through the offensive line into the run gaps. Jalen Carter, we think of him as this destructive pass rushing defensive tackle. He's sound and fundamental in the run game too. So I think the improvement there is something to note. But to your point, that's kind of what the Chiefs want, is to grind out those 3-4 yard plays every other down. So that's going to be the matchup.
And if you get in these third and short situations, that's where they run these mesh and rail concepts, and they're able to get a guy open in the flat or coming across the middle of the field. And you typically play more man coverage in those scenarios, and that's exactly what they want. So it all plays into how Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes want to play. And it's going to come down to these one-on-one matchups. Can they win on the interior of the offensive line? Because if you can generate pressure, you can stop the run through there with Milton Williams, with Jalen Carter, and just completely blow up plays and series. You have a chance to win this game and win it early on. But again, we're going to see what they do, because what Andy Reid and the Chiefs love to do recently is play the quick game, get the ball out hot, and not allow these mistakes to kind of materialize. On the other side, where you talked about the Eagles defense improving in terms of run defense, especially with these lighter boxes that Vic Fangio loves to run. Why they aren't the best at it. You know who is the best at defending the run in lighter boxes or like kind of neutral boxes?
Carolina Panthers.
Yes, no, the Carolina Panthers are 32nd probably in almost every defensive category, but the Kansas City Chiefs are one of the better defensive teams. And what's interesting is they've played 7 out of the 13 runners that went over 1,000 yards this year. It might be, I think it's 13. It might be like 15 or 16. Whatever the number is, it's close to 50% of the runners that amass that the Chiefs have played. And they've not only played 7 of these runners, they've technically played 9 because they played Joe Mixon and James Cook again in the postseason. Every single time they played one of these runners, none of them went over 100 yards. Now, some of these other like later performances in the season, some of these runners were getting over 80 yards. James Cook, Joe Mixon, they both went over 80 in the postseason against this Kansas City Chiefs. And where they found a lot of success is in a lot of man duo concepts. Kellen Moore loves running inside zone, but we saw with the one toss play against the Washington Commanders to start the NFC Championship game, they can go away and do stuff off script that we haven't necessarily seen. This isn't just like an Andy Reid staple in the postseason. Other play callers do this as well. So doing a little scout and film study, I think Kellen Moore can find a kind of advantageous situation to put Saquon Barkley and this rushing offense in a good position. I think the one thing that we need to be careful of, though, is Saquon is only 11th in success rate when running the ball. He's 3rd in explosive play rate. And that's where I think his strength is going to meet the Chiefs' strength. And that's kind of nullifying those big plays. Those 60-yard runs we've seen from Saquon, because the Chiefs are also a really good tackling team, may end up only being 20 yards. Like we saw the Jeremy Chin missed tackle on that first touchdown from Saquon against the Commanders. I don't think that happens if Brian Cook or Justin Reed are there to make the tackle. And so when you're able to take away a 60-yard gain and make it 15, 20 yards, it's obviously an explosive play, but it's not as big as what it could have been. And I think that's the difference when you play the Chiefs compared to like the Commanders or the Rams.
It might only be 20 yards, right? When we're talking about Saquon runs. For God forbid that he only gets 20 yards on a carry, right? Ashton Genty college kind of numbers there. But to the point you bring up, like I saw the tweet you put out, and it's got guys like Mixon, James Cook. James Cook did have 2 touchdowns against them in the AFC Championship. Derrick Henry as well. That was near the start of the season, yeah. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson.
Henry was week 1. Well, Lamar Jackson is the only runner, like only player to go over 100 yards, which I think puts the ball in Jalen Hurts' court, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But just from a running back standpoint, Saquon being the focal point in Philadelphia, yeah.
And guys like Chuba Hubbard, you're bringing him up. None of those guys are Saquon Barkley, right? And Saquon Barkley, obviously RB1 on the year, rested toward the end of the year, so he's a bit fresher. And to your point, in the playoffs, they were, I don't know if it was by design, but the Chiefs, instead of only allowing 60 or under 60 per game with running backs, it's up to 80 now, and they're allowing rushing touchdowns. I know Mixon had a touchdown in the Texans game. That's how they were in it in the first half. Saquon's a different beast from those guys, and I think in terms of run blocking, the Eagles' O-line is definitely better than probably all the O-lines that they've faced. I think the Lions are probably the only team up there in terms of just dominant run blocking that can match with the Eagles. And so
I think the Ravens are up there, but again, they didn't have Rosengarten out there, so it completely changes.
And I hate to always do like it was week 1 thing, but to me, week 1's always kind of a crapshoot because you've been off for the Chiefs and Eagles, they'll have been off for 7 months. A lot of teams are off for 10 months, right? And you don't really know what's going to happen. New players, coordinators, no tape. It's neither here nor there. But right now, my point being, I don't think the Chiefs have faced such a run attack like the Eagles O-line and Saquon present. And to your point, like Jalen Hurts is able to present toward the end of the season, it looked like Hurts was kind of like limping on his runs, a bit confused in his decision making. We saw him miss, what was it, 1 game when Kenny Pickett had to come in, and Tanner McKee also had to come in later in that game, but he's back now. To start the game versus not start the game, but it was the second touchdown, I believe, versus the Commander. Was it the Commanders or the Rams game where he had like the 45-yard rushing touchdown?
That was the Rams.
That was the first one in the Rams game, right? If he can continue playing at that kind of level, and he was not a speed demon on this play, I don't know how the Rams didn't run him down, but if he can do some zone read stuff and work and move the ball with his legs, that doesn't require a 250-pound guy behind him pushing him. If he can do that stuff by himself, I think that brings a whole new element to the run game. You talked about Lamar Jackson had over 100 rushing yards in that game. Well, what if Saquon gets his 120, because he probably will. If he can get over 100 and Hurts is able to add 50 to 60 in scrambling, that's a whole new ballgame. And
I
like the last point I'll bring up is Josh Allen had that capability, right, to get outside and run. They contained it, but James Cook is not Saquon Barkley.
Well, I want to be very clear about this when we talk about the Chiefs defensive line. Nolan Smith, phenomenal pass rusher. The thing is, he's a little bit undersized, and you get one or two bodies on him. You get running direction at him. Like you want to run at those undersized linemen.
Micah
You don't
Parsons style.
Exactly, because that's where the mismatch. And if for anybody who goes back and watches like a 2003 Super Bowl like kind of breakdown and the announcers are talking about it, they're talking about how the Patriots are running at Julius Peppers. He was a little bit undersized early on in his career. So some of these athletic defenders, sometimes their strength becomes their biggest weakness when it comes to running the ball. And in the case of the Eagles, what they're going to end up running into is George Karlaftis, Chris Jones, Mike Dana. Those are all guys that line up as kind of like that defensive end position. Those are some big boys. They know how to set the edge in the run game, and it's not super easy to run on them. And that's where it's like, okay, so do you run up the middle? Well, a lot of what Steve Spagnuolo likes doing is giving a look of like a blitz. You stick those linebackers in the A gap. You have bodies to kind of address these gaps. And while I am very confident that the Eagles are one of the best offensive lines, they have some injury concerns in the interior. Landon Dickinson and Cam Jorgens were not good in that NFC Championship game. 2 weeks could make a huge difference, but if I'm the Chiefs, I'm blitzing, I'm throwing exotic looks, I'm trying to get pressure up the middle and test just how good those players are, because if they can't hold up, I feel confident that even though this Chiefs defensive line will allow Saquon to get hits, whether that's just to the tune of an 80-yard game, or maybe he is the first running back to break over 100 yards against this Chiefs team. Regardless of what that looks like, I still think the Chiefs defensive line can really dictate kind of how this goes and force this team to be one-dimensional, which I think goes into the point that you were kind of talking about, is that Jalen Hurts needs to be the guy. He needs to be the guy in the run game, whether it's zone reads they pull or when he scrambles, and he can't be throwing away or taking a 2-yard sack out of bounds when he cuts the field in half and he decides to break containment from the pocket. He needs to be decisive. He needs to have answers. He needs to be throwing downfield to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. You have mismatches with some of these guys, and if you can't get that on the scramble drill, those couple negative plays are going to set you back as an offense and allow this Chiefs defense to get more aggressive, send more exotic blitzes. And they may do some simulated pressure looks that we saw Mike McDaniel really kind of become his bread and butter back in Baltimore last year. And if you're able to rush for and get pressure on Hurts, he struggles in those scenarios greatly. And so I think if they can make Hurts uncomfortable and he's got to be the one to go win the game, it becomes very much like the Cam Newton situation in 2015, where you got to put the team on your back. You got to make those plays. And if you don't, it's going to look really bad and really ugly.
Yeah, quick note on Landon Dickerson. When he was at Alabama, he tore his ACL and missed the final, I want to say 3 games. That year, Alabama won the national championship, 13-0. That was the Mac Jones year. And Landon Dickerson came in on a torn ACL and snapped the final ball there. So not going to question his toughness, like he said, and must have been Wednesday or something. The only way I'm coming off the field is if they cart me off. So I think he'll be ready to go. And the person he snapped it to in that game, by the way, was Bryce Young to finish that game. And earlier I brought up how Bryce talked about the Eagles defense. When he was talking about the Chiefs defense, he said it's the complete opposite. They're going to blitz you every single play. That's what Spagnuolo likes to do. These exotic pressures, sim pressures to your point. And he said one of the most impressive things about it was when they had those guys blitzing, normally that's a zone that they leave open, right? If Nick Bolton or Leo Chanel is blitzing over the middle where they're at, that's open. But the Chiefs are disciplined to where they don't zone match with that. They man match. The guy who doesn't blitz, that's his job to cover whoever's there. It's like, all right, identify that that's the hot route. That's what we have to do. Obviously, Bryce Young was able to succeed against that in the Chiefs game. But he's one of the, since his benching, returning from it, he's one of the better quarterbacks versus pressure in the league. I don't know if Jalen Hurts is going to be able to do that, but he's going to have to. We saw 2 years ago, he was that guy. He was the best player in that Super Bowl. Even though the Chiefs won, he was the better quarterback. They just couldn't overcome it with the talent. This time, I think when you're saying he has to be that guy, well, he has Saquon to rely on. That's a lot better than, I think it was Miles Sanders at the time. Dallas Goedert is back and healthy. The Chiefs struggle against tight ends. And then, like you were talking about on, what was it, Tuesday? Yeah, with your take, A.J. Brown is a perfect deep downfield threat. And when you have people of that caliber to be the person you throw it up to in those situations, I don't know if Hurts has to be that guy 100% of the time. And that's kind of the next thing I want to get into is I think the Eagles' pass options match up very well, or not very well, but I'm not sure the Chiefs have faced that caliber of passing attack
Outside of like the
consistently.
Bengals,
And I was
yeah.
going to say the Bengals because Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, one of the best duos in the league, but their tight end room consists of Mike Gesicki, Tanner Hudson. None of those guys are Dallas Goedert. And I had to say, since Goddard's come back, he's been a demon. Like the way he destroyed the Rams, really put that game away. Even though the Rams had a chance, they really didn't. He was healthy and strong in the Commanders game. I think he's going to be the key mismatch. If the Eagles offense finds the key to win, it's going to be with Dallas Goedert because once they blitz and he's over the middle, I don't think Justin Reed or Brian Cook is going to be able to slow him down with the ball in his hand.
We'll look at deep RPOs. I think it was Ben Solak and Mina Kimes were kind of talking about like that's where Dallas Goedert could get fed is on some of those. Just you have some good play action deep looks where he's one-on-one and you take that opportunity because the Chiefs are one of the worst teams against tight ends. We saw it opening day against Isaiah Likely. JT Sanders for the Carolina Panthers was getting his. You go through the list of tight ends they faced. I think Brock Bowers had a couple good days against them in his two matchup. Like that is an opportunity for the Philadelphia Eagles offense. And why Devontae Smith's been pretty consistent with, I think it's like 4 receptions in the last 3 or 4 games throughout the postseason. I think Dallas Goedert is really that X factor. And it's more just like what I was talking about, like it being on Jalen Hurts' shoulders. Like he's still got to deliver accurate passes. You don't necessarily have to throw a dime of a ball, but it's got to be a 50-50 jump ball for when you're taking these one-on-one shots with A.J. Brown down the sideline, when you find Dallas Goedert kind of open across the middle. Like if you aren't hitting these throws and making these plays when they're presented to you, this is a Chiefs defense that I think can make this offense one-dimensional, especially if they get up on this team early like they did against the Buffalo Bills. Remember, this was a team that came out firing on all cylinders, popping some RPOs, had a GT counter the Kareem Hunt that then they layered with a Patrick Mahomes like pull later in the game. Like there are different things that I think the Chiefs are going to come out swinging early and often. And if they hit on some of those, it's going to put a lot more pressure because again, Jalen Hurts, since like I believe week 10, has only trailed like twice in the second half. And those 2 times were against the Carolina Panthers, so Bryce Young and Jaden Daniels when they went to Washington, not the NFC Championship game. Well, guess what? They lost in Washington, and they almost lost to Bryce Young if Xavier Legette catches a ball. Now, granted, there's still a minute on the clock, 3 timeouts. Panthers heard this and saw this all year that the team drove down, kicked the
they're getting
that.
They're getting that field goal no matter what.
So we can at least hope, but the whole point is that like it got a little like butt clenching in those scenarios. And the Eagles don't look like a confident team in those scenarios, even though I think it was like the year before they were 10-1, had won a bunch of 1-possession games, including against the Chiefs in Kansas City being one of those games towards the end of that winning streak. But for me, the Chiefs have lived in this kind of temperature and just feeling of a game all throughout the year. They've trailed. They've had 1-possession games. They've had it go back and forth all the way down to the final seconds. And to me, we've seen the grit and the resilience of the Kansas City Chiefs. We haven't seen that with Jalen Hurts. And I feel like if he got in a situation like that, he could very well piss down his leg and really kind of wash away the Eagles' chances of winning a Super Bowl for the first time since 2017.
Well, you're right. We haven't seen that to a degree that the Chiefs have, but we also see the Eagles scoring 55 in the playoffs. We don't see the Chiefs doing that. You bring up how the Chiefs, not last week, 2 weeks ago, I'm doing it now. It was the last game. It feels like it was last week, but 2 weeks ago, you're right. They come out firing on all cylinders. They didn't start with the ball. It was 3 and out for the Bills. They almost intercepted Allen twice. They go down the field with the RPOs and score instantly. But at the end of that game, the Bills were in the driver's seat to come back and win it. It's not like they held on to a lead that was impossible to overcome. It came down to if you're a Bills fan, a bad spot. If you're probably a neutral fan or a Chiefs hater, it was a bad spot. I personally think it was inconclusive, and they called it that on the field. So that's what it is. It just happens to go that way. And But the Bills had a chance to win it. They had the ball with 3 minutes and 3 timeouts, didn't pull it off. Now, I'm not going to say Jalen Hurts is as good or even as clutch as Josh Allen. We've seen Josh Allen drive down the field and get wins like that. But it's not as if the Chiefs are putting teams away like this, is my point. They've been in these one score situations from their own design. It's not like it's like, all right, well, let's tighten up and get this win here. No, it's been close games. And there was like a stretch of 4 or 5 weeks where it was like the devil magic, where it was like a blocked field goal or something, or a missed field goal and stuff like that, or a fumble. I think the Raiders game was a fumble and they got the ball. And the ref was running onto the field for the false start and ran back off the field. It's stuff like that to where it's like, oh, the Chiefs have overcome these scenarios like this. Well, they've been getting a lot of good luck. And I don't think they faced a team as completely talented on both sides of the ball as the Eagles. And to me, that's really what it's going to come down to holistically as a whole. I think talent is going to overcome everything else, overcome coaching. I'm not a big Nick Sirianni fan. Overcome any shortcomings that Jalen Hurts might have. And ultimately, I don't think the Chiefs are equipped to deal with the current level of talent that the Eagles are. And we've talked about points for both the offense and the defense as to why that's true. Obviously, there are what is it? Like kink in the armor for both teams, right? There are weaknesses on both sides. We've discussed that already, but to me, and I'm staking my claim, jumping ahead to my take, but
whoa! Before we get the takes, I have a question for you. Who is the X factor on both the Eagles defense, Eagles offense, and the Chiefs defense, Chiefs offense? Like, if those teams want to pull it off, who has really got to like show out for both units?
All right, so I'll rattle them off, then we can talk about yours, I guess. I'm not going to do QBs or coaches. That's too easy for me. That's when we do our preseason expectations, that's a rule we do. No QB, no coach for the X factor. So Eagles defense, I am going to say whoever's covering DeAndre Hopkins. I'm presuming it's going to be Quinyon Mitchell. That would be my assumption. Maybe it's Darius Slay. That's who it is. Eagles offense, Saquon Barkley. Chiefs offense, I think you've convinced me about Xavier Worthy based on his recent performance. Earlier in the year, it didn't look super great about that pick, but he's come along well. Yet another Bills-Chiefs player that has defeated them, a Bills-Chiefs trades player. So whoever's covering D-Hop, Barkley, Xavier Worthy, and in the Chiefs defense, I'm going to go Nick Bolton or one of the blitzers that whoever's the heavy blitzer that Spags likes to bring. I'm going to presume Bolton is going to have a heavy hand in that because the interior O-line is injured, like you said, because it's going to force Jalen Hurts to make decisions. One of the worst games we saw from Hurts in the Eagles offense was the Carolina Panthers game. And it wasn't because we're star-studded on defense by any means. It was because Evero, who comes from the Vic Fangio system, understands that, hey, if we can throw him off, make him half a second slow and make him make decisions, it's going to cause trouble for Jalen Hurts, and that's exactly what we did. We've talked about it at length, but it was like 2 or 3 nickel and safety blitzes on Jalen Hurts' strong side, so where he's able to see it, making him slow down his reads and stuff like that. That was a key factor in that game. So, Saquon and whoever's covering D-Hop, then Nick Bolton / blitzer and Xavier Worthy. Those are my 4 X factors. What about you?
I think it's got to be Milton Williams on the Eagles defensive line. I think Nolan Smith, as much as he brings a lot of pros in the pass rush game, I think he's a liability in the run game. And that could be kind of the detriment to the Eagles defense. Jalen Carter, he's going to get double teamed. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not going to leave him one-on-one with Trey Smith. There have been talks that, hey, you even move him over to the left side, really make the Chiefs O-line kind of live in hell with now kicking out their left guard, Joe Thuney, to tackle. Which means you're going to have Creed Humphrey probably chipping with Trey Smith on Jalen Carter, leaving Milton Williams on these one-on-one situations. And since about like the halfway point in the year, I think he's only behind Chris Jones in pressure rate. So you have to take advantages of those mismatches against the backup guard. And if Milton Williams can't get home, he can't disrupt Patrick Mahomes, it's going to be a long day for this Eagles defense, in my opinion, because I think that is the true focal point. When you go to the Eagles offense, I think it's got to be kind of your tertiary, secondary weapons. Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith have to have a hell of a game. Like in order to win this, I think that is truly the X factor for the Eagles offense. Saquon and AJ Brown are going to get theirs, and they're going to be accounted for. When we flip it over to the Chiefs, I'll start with their defense. I think it's whoever is the other outside corner, whether it be Jalen Watson next to Trent McDuffie. It's that tertiary third guy that's out there that's really going to get tested. I trust Trent McDuffie. If he's one-on-one with Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, AJ Brown, it doesn't matter. He's shutting them down. It's about the other guy and the help they have over the top, and are they able to kind of corral these star-studded wide receivers. On the Chiefs offense, I think it comes down to the interior of the offensive line. But ultimately, I think it comes down to Joe Thuney. If you want to keep him at left tackle, and he is going to have some of these speed rushers at him, he's got to win some of these matchups on an island, because you're going to have to give that left guard help with either the running back or tight end kind of coming over and chipping on some of these releases. And I think that means Thuney has to be a step above what we've seen him over the past couple of weeks. He has to take his game just a little bit higher. And that's saying a lot for a guy that won Super Bowls with the New England Patriots, has won Super Bowls with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's doing it playing different positions. I mean, this guy is a true, like arguably Hall of Fame kind of player, and it's very cool. And I think in order for the Chiefs to win, he's got to have the game of his life.
I think Thuney is a Hall of Famer. 5 Super Bowls, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he has 5 currently. He has a case for being the best interior O-lineman ever, just based on resume. 2 with the Patriots, looking for, I think, his 4th with the Chiefs. The Chiefs might have won the first one before he was there, so he might be looking for his 5th ring. I like the point that you made, and it wasn't one that I considered, that when they bring the chip help, the Eagles, or the Chiefs, that's going to bring one less pass catcher for Mahomes to have on some of these plays where he might have to scramble and stuff like that. I think that's going to play a big role there as well. I like all your X factors. I think on both teams, both sides of the ball, there's going to have to be people that step up and go beyond, right? This is the Super Bowl. It's not like you're playing a bum team. Very rarely do we see even mid teams make the Super Bowl. It's usually superstar teams on both sides of the ball. And like I was saying, when it comes down to it, if you looked at these rosters and you covered up the name of Patrick Mahomes, I think undoubtedly you would argue that this Eagles roster is more talented by far. But obviously the other side has Mahomes. If you look at the coaching staffs and cover up the head coaches' names, the Eagles coaching staff is more talented as a whole. But then on the other side, the Chiefs have Andy Reid versus Nick Sirianni. And I think that's a huge mismatch. So while I truly believe in Mahomes and Andy Reid, and it's really hard to doubt them, they've been winning forever in the regular and postseason, I think there's just too much talent, just enough to get them over the hump this year. Let me ask you one question before I give you my take. Which team is better, just as a whole, holistically, agnostically? The 2022 Eagles that went to the Super Bowl, or this team?
I like the 2022 Jalen Hurts. And what I mean by that is I felt like his arm, even though he was a little bit slower of a processor, he was more like the ball's coming out. Like I'm pushing the ball downfield. He accurately threw it downfield. And I haven't seen that version of him. So why Saquon, I loved him back when he was at Penn State before he got drafted. That was before I kind of switched to running backs don't matter. Like I thought he should have been a top 5 pick. And so there's a lot to like with this Eagles team. I think defensively, their starters are better. I felt like they had more depth the last go round. And sometimes that helped them kind of create more turnovers, more sacks, be more opportunistic. So I think overall, this unit is more talented. I think the 2022 Eagles were more fun to watch. But yeah, no, take us away with your perfect take. I don't want to kind of step on or encroach what you have to say.
So your roundabout way of getting there is that you think this squad is more talented.
I think it's better, but I enjoyed watching 2022 a lot more. I
agree for sure. I think Steichen was doing something special with Jalen Hurts. But to your point, I agree that this team is more talented, and I don't think it's a little bit. I think this team would probably smoke in one game, because this is one game. I think this team would fry the 2022 team. Just from the upgrades they've had at running back, which was a weakness for them. Their defensive line in the run game was a weakness. Do you remember who the linebackers were in that Eagles game? It was
Yeah,
like
they left afterwards because they followed. They went to Arizona and Las Vegas. The two linebackers. I'm trying to remember who they were. They
to the
weren't like
Bears.
they weren't
It,
scrubs. Yeah, yeah, they
yeah,
lost a couple
it
guys.
was Kaiser White and TJ Edwards, I think, was the guy who went to the Bears. I think Zach Bond is and Nakobe Dean, when he was healthy, blow those guys out of the water. I think the upgrades to the secondary are so much better. So when you look at it that way and come to the grasp that the Chiefs won that last one by 3 points, I think the Eagles will take this game. And getting into my perfect take, Pat Riley apparently owns the term three-peat. I didn't know this. Apparently, that's his thing. They mentioned that he was open to not selling the rights, but letting the Chiefs use the term three-peat on like their championship gear. You know, as soon as the game's over, they have their shirts and hats and stuff, and it says your Chiefs are world champions, and it'll probably say three-peat on it if they win. My take is that he can rest easy. I bring up Pat Riley because the NBA trade deadline just happened, and I don't think he did a good job there. So while he might be hectic trying to recoup the Miami Heat right now, he can rest easy because they will not have to use the term three-peat because the Eagles will take this win.
So, you know, it's funny. I saw the news of that break like last week whenever like he got this trademark, but he got this trademark back in like the late 80s, early 90s. I'm thinking in my head, I was like, so did this not apply to the Chicago Bulls? Like that was my
Yeah,
first thought process was like MJ already three-peated. Like technically, if
twice.
anything, I absolutely. And that's more just like one of those things. Like I'm shocked that Air Jordan didn't somehow buy the rights to three-peat from Pat Riley, or there wasn't a negotiation with Nike. Regardless, I think even if the repeat wasn't on the table, a much cooler way of wording it will be the Patrick instead of the hat trick for
Ah,
Patrick Mahomes. So
I
I
see.
saw that one from a content creator on Twitter. I don't want to take any credit for that, but I think honestly that would be a better trademark considering it is Patrick Mahomes and he is really the driving force behind this team. My perfect take. I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to be perfect. The last time these two teams played, he did not take a sack. But in most of the Super Bowls, I think it's only a Super Bowl or two he's been in, he hasn't thrown an interception. I think that streak continues. This is a really good secondary. Balls can get tipped up. It'll be a kind of pivotal moment. But again, we've seen them overcome even some of these smaller mistakes and rally, or they make these mistakes when they're up and then they're able to still kind of pull away at the end. And obviously, like you said, you brought up some devil magic. A lot of this has been because they are prepared on both the offense and defensive side. And we saw when it came down to it, when all bets were down, they were able to throw an exotic look and pressure that not even Josh Allen could handle. And he was, I believe, the only quarterback this year, it might have been him and Lamar, that had a positive EPA when pressured. And so you're able to pressure Jalen Hurts. I think those were the mistakes happen. And this is not a part of the perfect take, but I do believe that the Chiefs do three-peat. I just think they find a way. I think they win just enough of the plays that get the hump. And that's what they've mastered. They've shown that over the past 3 years, especially over this past year. They probably shouldn't be 15-2, but they played a good strength of schedule. They beat the teams they needed to get here. And I think they're well prepared to handle this iteration of the Philadelphia Eagles.
I like that one. I don't want to, when people say devil magic because it's close games, I think one thing we don't take into account is because they're so successful, because they're so well coached on both sides of the ball, they're fundamentally sound and they're not as prone to make these mistakes because of that, because they're coached so well. And so we attribute it to devil magic, like all the stuff breaks right for them. Well, some of it might, but sometimes they're just also better, more disciplined, better coached. And I think that's important to bring up regarding like looking at their record. The thing that I will leave you with is this, and I like your take that Mahomes is going to be imperfect. He might take a sack and throw an interception there.
He'll do both. He's going to take at
He
least
will
a
do
sack
both.
and throw at least an interception. It is a combo.
If he takes like a strip sack fumble, are you going to count that?
No, because I said an
Nope.
interception.
Okay.
I hold me to that because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a strip sack fumble. He won't throw an interception, and it'll go
Because he did have a
one of the
strip
two
sack
ways.
fumble versus the Bills 2 weeks ago.
It wasn't strip sack. It was a read option. He didn't pull the ball correctly,
You're
and
right.
the ball
You're
hit
right.
the ground. So you're
My final point that I want to bring up is we talk about this Vic Fangio scheme and what it likes to do. Mahomes has faced a similar scheme already this season, in the Carolina Panthers scheme. Obviously, the talent nowhere close to the Eagles, but Patrick Mahomes, 5 sacks in that game. And now he's going against a similar scheme with people like Jalen Carter, like Nolan Smith, like players of that ilk. So that's the final thing.
But they don't blitz. They don't blitz. They don't blitz.
They don't need to. And that's the final thing I'll leave. Hey, the Chiefs O-line was good and healthy when we played them, and we got Mahomes on the ground 5 times. So the final thing I'll leave you with is, how are they going to go up against an Eagles defense that is similar, but they're much, much better? I think that's going to do it for us. You heard it here. I think Jacob thinks the Eagles will break the three-peat. Steven believes that they will hit the Pat trick. Credit to the guy that Steve got that from on Twitter. We will be back next week after this game has happened. Unfortunately, the season will be over, but the podcast won't be. We'll be talking about free agency, drafts, and all that. But next Tuesday, we want to break down the game as kind of a final send-off to the 2024-25 season. So for today, that's going to do it for us. Follow us on Twitter, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and be ready for the Super Bowl. Cherish it. It's the last game of the season. So as always, keep pounding.